2020, the year that just keeps on taking, meted out perhaps its most devastating blow to the world of football on Wednesday afternoon, with the news that Maradona was dead. At the age of 60, Maradona suffered a cardiac arrest at his home in Tigre, Buenos Aires. El Diego hasn't been in good health for much of the last 30 years, having become addicted to cocaine during the mid-1980s and having suffered serious health scares on a couple of occasions during the 2000s. Despite his long-term ill health, Maradona's death still came as a shock. The man they call El Pibe de Oro, meaning Golden Boy in Argentina, had been admitted to hospital in La Plata at the start of the month, undergoing surgery for a blood clot on his brain. But the surgery was a success, and Maradona was discharged around 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, decades of drug and alcohol abuse, obesity, and struggles with addiction had seemingly taken their toll on one of the greatest footballers of all time, and now a nation mourns. Diego Armando Maradona is one of the most famous athletes of all time, and tributes to him have poured in from across the globe. In Argentina, though, it is different. It's difficult to describe the importance of Maradona to the people of Argentina, not just as a footballer or athlete, but as a cultural icon. Maradona was a flawed genius, but his flaws just made him all the more human. It may be hard for some people to understand, but Lionel Messi could have won Argentina the 2014 and 2018 World Cups and eclipsed, statistically, the accomplishments of El Diego. But in Argentina's national consciousness, no one will ever eclipse him. Messi never stood a chance. It isn't just about talent or performances, it's about the devil inside of Maradona, the will to win, at all costs, and the way in which he always seemed to be on the edge. Lionel Messi is like footballing perfection. His passing is pinpoint, his finishing laser-like, and he almost never loses possession of the ball. Maradona wasn't nearly as dependable in all of these areas. He made far more mistakes, both on and most emphatically of all, off the pitch. But there was a spark inside of him that burnt as brightly as the sun in the searing summer heat of Buenos Aires. Maradona was a maverick who had a deep love of football, but oftentimes endured a troubled relationship with the sport. During the good times, though, there was nothing quite like the love affair between Diego Armando Maradona and the most popular sport on earth. He had that all-too rare ability to be able to drag a team up out of the mire and towards greatness. A volatile and often unpredictable character, with his many demons, Maradona might not have been an obvious choice as captain, but out on the pitch, his desire could never be questioned. Maradona was capable of lifting everyone around him with his ferocious explosive talent, and refusal to ever be beaten. Even some of Maradona's darkest moments, such as when he was sent home from the 1994 World Cup in disgrace, were motivated by an unwavering will to win, most fervently expressed whenever he represented the national team. In the season before the 1994 World Cup, Maradona had made just 5 appearances back in Argentina with Newell's Old Boys. At the age of 33, Maradona was still recovering from his 15th-month suspension for cocaine abuse at Napoli in many respects, and he was in no fit state to compete on world football's biggest stage. Consequently, he took the performance-enhancing drug known as ephedrine primarily in order to lose weight and regain fitness. Although Maradona's time with both Napoli and the Argentina's national team ended in long-term drug-related bans and are often described as having ended in disgrace, Maradona remains both Naples and Argentina's most beloved son. Maradona grew up poor in the slums of Villa Fiorito on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. His mother and father were childhood sweethearts, and Diego was the family's 5th child, but their first son. He honed his skills on the streets of Villa Fiorito as a child, falling in love with the sport and attracting the attention of Argentinos Junior scouts whilst he was still only 8 years old. Maradona was a spectacularly talented child, even from that early age, and during his time as a ball boy, he would delight spectators at halftime through his freestyling ability. Maradona never lost that childish spirit and love of having the ball at his feet, and his training routines were as joyous and personalised at 30 as they had been when he was just 12. He made his Argentinos Juniors debut at the age of 15, 10 days shy of his 16th birthday, and there may never have been a more talented 15-year-old in the history of the sport. Maradona is always remembered for his performances with Argentina and Napoli, but his early years were among the most phenomenal aspects of his playing days. Maradona idolised Independiente legend Ricardo Bocchini whilst he was breaking into the Argentinos Juniors first team, and indeed for all of his life, and Bocchini was only 6 years his senior. Bocchini was a classic Argentine number 10 with a superb understanding of the game and ability on the ball, although his physical attributes were far from outstanding and his shooting didn't pack that much of a punch. Nonetheless, he was Maradona's idol, but by the age of 18, Maradona had already outgrown anything Bocchini could do on a football pitch. As a 17-year-old, he scored 19 goals for Argentinos Juniors in a single season, and by 19, he was averaging a goal a game as a withdrawn forward. Maradona was just 17 when Argentina hosted the 1978 World Cup, but already many were outraged when Cesar Luis Menotti left him out of the World Cup winning squad. By the time the 1982 World Cup came around, though still only 21, Maradona was already the most expensive footballer in the world. Following a single season at Boca Juniors, Maradona was signed by Barcelona for £5 million, smashing a world record that had stood for 6 years. Within 2 years, he had broken his own record, becoming the first player to set world record fees twice. The 1982 World Cup was played in Maradona's new country of residence, Spain, but it would be a tournament to forget for El Diego. Combated aggressively, most famously by Claudio Gentile against Italy, Maradona struggled to get hold of games, as Argentina's campaign was coloured by internal conflict, particularly between the old guard, who had won the World Cup 4 years earlier, and the younger players like Maradona. In Argentina's final game, Maradona was sent off 5 minutes from time against the nation's eternal enemies Brazil. It was the first heartbreak of many during Maradona's career, but redemption would arrive in Mexico 4 years on. El Diego's time in Catalonia was disrupted by injuries, illness, and ill-discipline, although he was still majestic when in full flow. Despite suffering a broken ankle and a bout of hepatitis, Maradona still managed to score 38 goals in 58 games in just 2 seasons at the Camp Nou, becoming the first Barca player to receive a standing ovation at the Santiago Bernabeu. Ultimately, it was his fighting, both with the opposition on the pitch and with club president Josep Luis Núñez off the pitch, that led to Barcelona's decision to sell Maradona in the summer of 1984. Maradona still had a reputation as one of the finest players on the planet, commanding a second world record fee, but his destination of choice came as a surprise to some. Napoli had been showing the ambition to rival Italy's established teams over the past 12 months, but they had still finished 12th in Serie A the season before Maradona arrived. Around 75,000 fans greeted the Argentine when he arrived in Naples, hailing him as a god from day one. Although it was during his time at Naples that Maradona's struggles with addiction began to spiral, it was also the period in which he reached the peak of his powers. Whilst not single-handedly, as the cliché so often goes, Maradona was the key cog in dragging Napoli from a bottom-half side into a full-blown juggernaut, which brought an end to the Milan and Turin-based teams holding a stronghold over the Scudetto. Over the next 7 years, Maradona played more than 250 games for Napoli, becoming the club's all-time top scorer, in a record that wasn't surpassed until Marek Hamšík did so only a couple of years ago. With Maradona as captain, Napoli won 2 Serie A titles, 1 Coppa Italia, 1 UEFA Cup, and 1 Supercoppa Italiana. It was also during his time at Napoli that Maradona redeemed himself at world football's premier cup competition and reached what is quite possibly the peak level of performance any footballer has ever reached at a major tournament. Even for someone as talented as Maradona, the level he reached at the 1986 World Cup was just something else. Against Belgium in particular, but also against England and virtually every team Argentina took to the field against, there was no stopping the explosive 5'5" number 10. Maradona twisted and turned past every challenge, weaving past defenders and making football look ludicrously simple. Once again, it is hyperbole to claim that Maradona single-handedly won the World Cup, as some have done, perhaps down to the obvious pun, but it is not hyperbole to suggest that he was the best footballer of all time at that moment in time. Messi and Ronaldo may have outstripped Maradona's career achievements over the last 15 years. Certainly, both have been far more consistent and have remained at the highest level for a lot longer, but neither have ever had a tournament like Maradona at the 1986 World Cup. If you are someone who judges players on their performances when it matters most, and you value the World Cup above all else, it's easy to see why you might come to the conclusion that Diego Armando Maradona is the greatest footballer of all time. During the 1990s, many of the vices Maradona had developed during the mid-80s began to catch up with him. He failed a drugs test at Napoli and was slapped with a 15-month ban, with his struggles with cocaine addiction becoming common knowledge. Maradona had developed a reputation for missing training sessions and turning up to games not exactly sober, and this was inevitably spilling over into his performances. He remained a force of nature on the pitch, regardless of the substances in his body, but that 15-month ban was too much for Napoli to bear. He left the club in 1992 and spent a single season with Sevilla, before returning to Argentina, firstly with Newell's Old Boys and then with Boca Juniors. As already mentioned, it was during this time that Maradona was sent home from the 1994 World Cup in an international scandal due to doping, and that put an end to his 17-year love affair with the Argentina national team, with whom he won 91 caps. Maradona actually retired after the 1994 World Cup and went into management, before making a comeback, though his health struggles made his return a struggle at Boca Juniors. Although he had no official roles within the world of football between 1997 and 2008, Maradona was never out of the headlines for long, whether it was for good or bad. There were repeated hoaxes stating that he had died during 2007 as he underwent gastric bypass surgery to cure his long-term struggles with obesity. The new slimmed-down Maradona went on to manage the Argentina national team in a wildly controversial tenure that I covered in a video only a few months ago. At the time of his death, Maradona was still working in management, coaching top-flight Gimnasia de La Plata, having been involved in coaching in some capacity almost permanently for the last 12 years. There would probably have been more lucrative ways for Maradona to spend his time, given his enormous global image and brand, juxtaposed with his volatile reputation as a coach. But Maradona simply couldn't stay away from football for long. The sport was in his blood. Just a month before his death, Gimnasia won 3-0 on Maradona's birthday, and he required assistance just to make his way to the dugout. In hindsight, Maradona does not look like a well man, but his love of the game was undiminished. As an Englishman, I sometimes felt as though I was raised to hate Maradona. His hand of God goal against England at the 1986 World Cup was among the most high-profile acts of cheating the sport has ever seen, and no doubt, had such an action knocked England out of a World Cup during my lifetime, I would have felt greatly aggrieved. But somehow, I've just never been able to find it in my heart to hate Maradona. That game perhaps summed him up better than any other. A hero and a villain, a genius and a cheat, but always entertaining, always controversial, and willing to stop at nothing to win a game of football. Besides, Peter Shilton was about a foot taller than him, hand or no hand, there's no way that he shouldn't have been getting to that ball first. There are many reasons why I have always found it difficult to dislike Maradona. For one, I love football, and anyone who cannot appreciate the things that Maradona could do with the ball at his feet, I would suggest, does not. And then there's the fact that Maradona is a bit of all of us. We are all conflicted. Imperfect human beings with talents and flaws that make us who we are. Maradona may have had more flaws than most, but he also had more talent, perhaps more than anyone else in the history of the sport. So my thoughts are with all of our Argentine subscribers, football fans across the globe, and of course all of Maradona's family and friends. The world of football has lost one of its greatest players and biggest characters, but in the footage of his brilliance, and in tales that will now be passed down through generations, his genius will never be forgotten. Thank you all for watching today's video, give us a like if you enjoyed it, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for HITC 7s.